Today we're going to do oral histories of Dr. George Fayson and Miss Fisher, and we appreciate you being here. It's April 15th, 2019. And Miss Fisher, when did you come here, or were you born here? And what was your family?
I was born here in June 22nd, 1918, to Mr. and Mrs. Arthur and Idella West. And I was delivered by the midwife, Mary Fayson. They called her Mammy. And everybody loved her. And everybody, mostly, it was all Faysons mostly. We were in the middle of the bunch. And our house was the gathering house for everybody. And we would, on Friday nights, we would have a big fire in the yard, and the children would, the mothers would be on the porch visiting, and the children would be outside playing by the fire. And we enjoyed that very, very much. And we'd have little tents. We'd build little tents, and we'd have church in little tents out there in every night. And Mammy would have prayer meeting at her house. We would go there for prayer meeting on Thursday evening. Then we had little stoves out there. There was Amosville had a little stove on the corner of 2nd Avenue. And then on 1st Avenue, they had Sam's grocery stores. And then on 2nd Avenue, we had, and it was a store, we called it the Blue Ribbon. And then we had, on 1st Avenue, there was a lady had a beauty parlor, Miss Lillian Wilson. And on Dummett Street, there was Taylor's store, and his wife had a beauty parlor, Elizabeth Taylor Beauty Parlor. And then there was the Baptist Church, Bethlehem Baptist Church. And on Vega Street, they had a church there one time. It was a Benevolent Baptist Church. And we had another one, and we had St. James AME Church and Bethlehem Baptist Church, all on Dummett. And on the corner of Pine Street, there was a church there. It's called what? It's the Holiness Church. And then we have a church there. They had one of the Jehovah's Witnesses on Dummett Avenue, and we had the Maxwell House, and on Dummett we had the Sunshine. That was in front of the Sunshine Hotel, and then there was another boarding house, and on the end was one run by Sarah Williams. It was called the Williams apartment, boarding house. And we had a ballpark between Vega and Dummett Street, where they would play baseball. And we had the church, the school where we went to school, and we called the school the barn house. We had one school. It was just one building, one story, and that burned down, and then they built the one that they called the
barn.
The barn. Because you could sit in there and feel the air coming in, and we had the pot-belly stove in there, and then the little red hot heaters. We had to get wood to burn to keep warm by, and then they graduated, remodeled it and moved out to out on Sycamore, and that's where they built the Gibson School. And I graduated from the old barn.
And that was called Titusville
Negro School, yes.
Yeah. So who were some of your teachers?
Some of my teachers were Miss Sadie Gibson and Mrs. Tabitha Pittman. We called her Mama. And the strictest teacher was Mrs. Victoria Rogers. She would come out and check you every day when you line up, and they said, you couldn't, whenever she walked in, you couldn't hear a pin fall. And they said, Naomi Wynn, Walter Wynn, Wilhelmina Gilbert, Bernice McDowell Williams, and the most valuable principal we had was Mr. Harriette T. Moe and Mrs. Harriet Moe. And we had Jolie Smith, and some of those were some of the principals. But my earliest principal was Mr. Turner, and I had one was Mrs. Bernice Edwards, Miss Edwards. Grace Edwards was my first teacher, and during that time they didn't have all the convenience they have now, and then we had they used to have sawmill. They'd have camp meeting once a year. Everybody'd come in the summertime and have a big revival meeting, and they called it the campground.
And it was called a camp meeting.
Camp meeting, yes, at the campground. And then we lived in what they call the sawmill. We had a sawmill out there one time.
Was that Enix Sawmill? Enix Sawmill?
I don't know. That was before my.
Probably Enix.
For our time.
Yeah, but they call that the mill quarters.
Mill quarters.
Because they had a little mill out there sometime once upon a time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and during that time there were families out there. The Fayson family was the biggest family. And then there was Emma Bell, and the teachers would stay at her house. And there was Amy, my grandmama, Amy West, lived on there, and the Harveys, Reverend Bishop Harvey, and his family lived on there. And this is Mrs. Della Best, and then it was Mrs. Pickens. Emma Pickens lived on that street. But and then we had a little church. We have a church out there now, the Holiness Church, the first church, the sanctified church, the Holiness Church, was built by Mother Anderson. She went out to the sawmill and got the material and built it herself. And then she had a little kindergarten there that she taught school. And every day the children would go and take one potato, and she'd take that potato and they'd make French fries for them. Oh, nice. And she taught them how to read and write and told them about the Bible and how to live.
This was my teacher.
Yeah. But unfortunately, nobody knew how she died. She walked away, and when they found it, they just found there's her remains.
Oh, my.
Yes, and up on De Leon, the Williams family was up there, and
Now, was that Artie Williams?
no, that was the
Colin Williams.
Colin Williams,
Colin Williams.
right? Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any of the Gibsons?
Oh yeah, on South Street there was, they call him Parkett. It was Gibson, and they lived. Then they had a little drugstore, and then on Sundays we would go there and eat ice cream, and then later when Victoria married Jake Rogers, they had a theater, and we would go there and watch movies. Hoop Gibson and Roy Rogers.
And where was the theater located?
On
South Street. And the railroad.
And
By the railroad?
And then that was called, that street right there is called the Railroad Alley.
Railroad Alley.
Uh-huh.
Can we stop just for a second? So I want to raise this up a little bit because I'm getting some reflections. Ms. Fisher's
We may
eyeglasses, and I just want
have to change.
Yeah, I'm gonna, yeah.
Make a change.
Well,
Yeah. I'll
but
back on.
you probably
Yeah,
know
Okay.
Andrew Gibson.
Andrew
You
Gibson.
probably knew Andrew Gibson.
Yeah. Who? Andrew Gibson his name was Andrew Gibson.
Yeah, you knew Andrew Gibson.
Right.
A very fine, upstanding statesman.
Yes.
He had a lot of contributions to Titusville.
Right, he did. And then they were Maddie and Mitch Hammond. And then there was the Hawkins, Jim Hawkins and his family lived on Palm Avenue. And some of the people that were there, and Handy Walker and his family lived on Hopkins.
And the Bernice
and Addie Gibson, Addie Rivers, and Bernice McDowell, which became Williams, lived on Tropic.
Tropic and Union.
And Union, yeah. And then there was we had a blacksmith named Charlie Green.
Charlie Green?
Right, he was on the Union. Huh?
He fixed everything.
On the Union.
He was a blacksmith.
And
he was on Union Street.
And then there were the Arthur and Idella Griffin that lived on Olive. It was Olive on Olive and Olive and Union. And then Louise and Ed Davis lived on Wega, their family. And the McCurdy's lived on Wega.
How about, do you remember Buddy Wilson?
Buddy Wilson, yes.
Yeah.
He lived. Buddy Wilson lived on First Avenue.
On First Avenue, yes.
And the Giles and Edna Williams lived on First Avenue. Wilson. And then there was I can't think of her name right now. Gertrude
Brown. Gertrude Till at the time.
Gertrude Till.
And Addie Till.
Lived on First Avenue.
And then there was Mr. Sims' store that was there.
The Sims store was on First Avenue, and then they had a large building there. They called it the
Cotton Club.
Cotton Club.
And where was that located?
That was on First Avenue.
On First Avenue.
In front of the Sims store.
Mr. Fayson, before we go on, introduce yourself, please. Dr. Fayson.
I'm Dr. Fayson. I grew up in Titusville. I was born in 1933. And of course, I said earlier that this is my godmother who rescued me from a burning building. She was a teenager, and I must have been about 18 months old, thereabout.
Oh.
And I've been very close to well, as a matter of fact, our family's been close over the years. My family came here in 1912. And my father, Frank Fayson, was the first Fayson to come to town. Let me give you some background on my family. My grandfather is a Tar Heel out of North Carolina. He was born into slavery, and then he, of course, was freed back during the, I forget exactly the birth date, but he and the master's son grew up as playmates, and later on became business partners. Of course, he had been freed, the family had been freed by that time. He was a youth, so he was a young kid. And but they, as they grew up, as friends, and they became business partners later on in life. And they would gather the turpentine, or the tar from the pine trees.
Oh.
And my grandfather was a contractor. He was fortunate enough to not work for someone else, but he would contract crews of men to gather navel jelly from the pine trees. And that took him from North Carolina down into South Carolina, where he met my grandmother, Mary Fayson, and everyone called them Mammy and Pappy Fayson.
Yeah.
And as I indicated earlier, my father was the first of the Faysons to come to town. And he later sent for my grandmother and the lady that you had an opportunity to meet, Ella Fayson Pratt. And they came to town and lived at a boarding house, Mobley, what was it? Sarah Mobley. It is up on Pine and Dummit. And the building has since been razed. And my grandfather, as I pointed out earlier, was a private contractor. And the Florida East Coast Railroad coming through needed tires to put the tracks on. And he contracted with whoever would buy the tires for that particular job. And he would have crews of men, including his sons, who hewed out the cross ties that the rails would be placed on. And of course, the south of Palm Beach and other areas was supplied out of Titusville. The railroad was extended down into the South Florida through Titusville. And out of my grandfather also was a minister, yes, and AME minister, and at St. James AME Church. He was not assigned there, but he was one of the ministers that was associated with the St. James
Here in Titusville.
In Titusville, and as a result of that, 4 of his sons became outstanding AME ministers in the state of Florida. They were referred to as the 4 Horsemen of Florida and in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I too graduated from Titusville High School. And of course, I indicated earlier, this is my godmother. who I found out later on was Miss Titusville Colored High. Was it colored at that time? I think
Yes,
they
yes,
had a
yes,
reference.
yes.
Colored. And she was Miss Titusville Colored High School.
Wow.
And,
And what year was this?
1941.
1941.
And she there's a picture in one of the books. I'll share that with you at some time.
Okay.
And I graduated there in 1952. And some of the persons that were mentioned earlier, Mrs. Gibson, Mrs. McDowell, who became Mrs. Warren, was my teacher that I was most impressed with. We had a little booklet that was called Current Events. And I can remember well how she was so impressed when Dr. Ralph Bunch was named given the Nobel Peace Prize for his involvement with Israel and Egypt at that time. And she also afforded trips for us up to Bethune-Cookman College. She had a relationship with Mrs. Bethune, even though she graduated from Bennett College in North Carolina. And Mrs. Sadie Gibson was our math teacher, and as pointed out earlier by my godmother, the building that we had there was a two-story building with, as I can envision, 4 classrooms on the top and 4 classrooms on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
This was in the barn.
In the barn.
In the barn.
There was no, there was only the outside
Right.
boarding.
Yeah.
And as she pointed out earlier, during the winter time, the wind would blow through. And we had potbelly stoves, and we'd go out and gather wood to come in and build a fire, and the teachers were able then to go on with the instructions. But then you mentioned some of the businesses in Titusville, and I think you covered that very well. There was a little place over here where the old Sylvan Park was, and that was Miss Serena Mill had a restaurant there.
Right.
That we would leave the school and go up and have those of us who had a quarter or two and buy little hamburgers and sodas. And for that 45 minutes that we had, or 30 minutes, whatever it was, we had for lunch. But it was just a walk up, down, around the corner. None of the roads were paved at that time, all of the roads in that area. And I can remember well that the one that the extension of South Street was gravel. And we would come on the gravel road over to Miss Serena Mill's restaurant.
Where was Titusville Negro School or Titusville Colored School? Where was that physically located?
That was located where the Harriette V Center is on De Leon, but it was
The Social Services Center.
right, but it faced Wager Street rather than
Faced Wagers.
right. The what street is that back?
What?
De Leon.
The Leon,
De Leon was just a little trail at that
Right.
time.
because it ended in most of it, because the Williams and then the Rogers house, Tom and Mary Rogers house.
Right, the Maxwells, the Williams, and the Rogers occupied
Davises.
that portion of
And
De
Davis.
Leon. And the Davis did that.
Purdy.
Yeah, right.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1952.
And what year did you graduate?
1941.
1941.
It's a little
Little
distance
difference
between
there,
us.
isn't
Right.
there? You had mentioned, Miss Fisher, you had mentioned the Sunshine Hotel. I had the pleasure of talking many years ago with Mrs. Gertrude Gibson, who had moved to Jacksonville, and she had mentioned that also.
Right.
And when I looked it up, Judge Robbins had built that hotel for the Grove workers and railroad workers, so they'd have a decent place to live. And I actually have a description of that hotel that I found in a writing. It was quite large and 2-story. Do you remember anything about that hotel? What it looked like, so I can compare that to what the writings that I found, or who actually stayed there? Was it the railroad workers stay there, or the Grove workers stay there? Do you remember? And what happened to it? I understand it burned down.
It burned down. It was just a simple building.
Yeah.
You know.
Across from the AME Church.
Right.
And,
on the west side of the railroad
on the
track.
west,
Yeah,
it was
on the
yeah, all of it was on the west side,
side of the
of
railroad
Right,
track, but
right.
across the street.
but it was
from the
across
church.
Dermot Avenue
Okay.
from the church.
Right.
And I can, well, it was still standing when I
Yeah.
graduated, I believe.
Oh,
It
really?
was still
So it
standing.
was still standing, and
And no one at that time, I think, no one much was living in that.
It was still, because, you know, Sam and Eva ran it.
Right, they ran it for a while.
was it run as a hotel boarding house?
Right.
It was a boating house.
A boarding
is what it
house,
was.
yeah.
In the Gibbons.
And so this was still run as a boarding house
Up
in
into the 50s.
1950s.
Right.
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 So we should be able to find some photographs somewhere of it.
Right.
It should
yeah.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the main traffic was South Street.
Yes.
South Street and Dummit.
Yeah.
And all of the paving ended at South Street and Dummit. And everything else
was
Right.
South Street was gravel, as I pointed out, back down.
Well, yeah, and then the rest part of the Dummit, and right at the Baptist church, there used to be a puddle. There's a little ditch ran behind it, you know, and all the water, and it settled it, and people would get bogged down in the water, you know. And one it rained so one day, and I think Mrs. Pauline Paris got stuck in the water, and after that they paved it.
Do you remember what Sullivan Lake looked like?
It was just a little pond, like you know. It was about how wide. It was about-
Sullivan Lake.
Sylvan.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, because it ran behind
Sullivan Lake.
it ran behind our house.
It was behind the house. Now, there's a story there. Sylvan Lake was filled in by the young men of that era. J.W. Smith, Sam Edmondson, John B. King, and those filled that area in. And so they would have a ball field. You did your own recreation at that time. Nobody supplied anything. You made it yourself. And I can remember well speaking with the person you mentioned earlier, Mr. Ralph Wilson, Buddy Wilson.
Yes, Buddy Wilson.
He too was a part of that group, and they would have real competitive baseball on weekends.
And
On
this-
Saturdays. You didn't do any of that on Sunday. None of that
No.
on Sundays.
Sunday was Sabbath day.
Sabbath day, and you kept it holy, for sure. And there were those who even prepared their meals. No meals were cooked. Eat, but no meals were cooked during that time.
This lake was tell me where physically this lake was located so people will know where it was located.
Where the ball field is.
Where the ball,
At
Where the,
Kyler Center.
No.
Excuse me,
No.
at Campbell.
Campbell
Campbell
Center.
And there's a
Right.
story there too, and I'd like to share that
Yeah.
with you.
yeah,
But her family, the house by the side of the road, it was a place that everybody coming to town At that time, they referred to it as Colored Town.
Right.
Everybody coming to Colored Town who would get off the train, off the bus, off of US 1, or the Florida East Coast Railroad, would come by the Mr. Arthur West to get information on where could they find whoever it was they were looking for. And that house was that house by the side of the road that welcomed everybody.
Yeah, that's where they are.
And the Sullivan Park, eventually became Sullivan Park, was behind the West.
Okay.
And in the years as it developed, they bought land. And I served on the first Parks and Recreation Board that purchased the land around the Sullivan Park there. And they bought up the households. And Mr. Arthur West was the last person to let his property go. And they had to make a promise to him. And he did not want to sell. And he, I don't know if it was Bernice urging or whatever it was that he sold, but they indicated that they would put a fountain there. But over the years, it never happened.
It's never happened.
And then in later years, I drew up a petition to rename the park for a fellow by the name of Isaac Campbell, Sr., who was our football coach and who was the baseball coach. And that petition was successful, and it became the Isaac Campbell Center. But to go back now, they had promised to put that fountain in, and it never happened. And I came back before the city council and reminded them that they were to put a fountain there. But rather than a fountain, they put a pavilion. And that pavilion is named for the Arthur and Idella West. It's there now, and our attorney, Mr. Shivers,
So, yeah.
he was the one that supported, in other words, reminded the city that was in the records, that it had been passed, that they would name the park, would put that fountain there for them. But it came to the point where rather than the fountain, the pavilion that is there, and it is, of course, with the name of Arthur and Idella West.
Who, when I was doing some work over at the Campbell Center, Isaac Campbell Center, I was surprised that they didn't have anything up in the center about Isaac Campbell at that time. Mm-hmm. And I suggested that they needed to have some information about who Isaac Campbell was, so the children who attended there would know the significance of it. Right. Could you expound on Isaac Campbell a little bit?
Isaac Campbell, a young man who grew up out on First Avenue. And he was quite involved in his community. And upon returning from World War II, he took advantage of the GI Bill and earned a bachelor's degree from Florida Memorial College, which was located in St. Augustine at the time. Since then, it has moved to Miami. But Isaac earned that degree and taught in the adult program at the old barn. And in the meantime, he would earn a master's degree from Philadelphia. What school is that? It skips me right now, but oh, George, what is this? But
Penn State?
No, it's not Penn State. It'll come to me.
Okay.
And he earned that degree. And he came back and working it with the veterans at night and affording interscholastic athletic activities for those of us who were in the Negro High School, Titusville Negro High School at the time. And he was instrumental in many of us going off who could not afford college, and encouraged us to go into the military. I happened to be one of them who went into the Air Force, which afforded me the opportunity to study under the GI Bill. And I can remember one of my friends who has since passed on, Curly Edmondson, who he was able to secure a basketball scholarship at Florida Memorial College, which was located in St. Augustine at that time. And Curly did some time there, and then he too went into the military. And he was a counselor for the various young people around the Titusville Mims area. And a petition I passed around through the community to get that place, the Sylvian Park, named for Isaac Campbell Sr. And in later years, after we, would be some years later, that his wife passed on, and we were able to secure the trophies and other plaques from the old Titusville Negro School, and the Parks and Recreation supplied a nice display case, which was dedicated in the name of his wife, Janet Campbell. And that's basically where we are with that at this point.
Well, it's a wonderful attribute to the community, and I hope that the children appreciate the center and appreciate the history behind the center. And as we move forward in the revitalization of the neighborhood, I'm hoping that oral histories and the history of the people who lived there and the contributions that they gave to the community will be presented at the center, so the children who grow up now will understand what it was like back in your days, but also the hard work and the sacrifices you all had to make to be to the point where you are today. And you mentioned the Faysons were involved in turpentining.
Yes.
Did they ever get involved in the turpentining here in Brevard County?
Yes. As I pointed out, my grandfather and the master's youngest son were partners, and it turned out that the master's son was they met and later they split, and my grandfather came down through South Carolina, where he met and married my grandmother, and then into Jessup, Georgia area, where he worked cruiser men, and then there over into North Florida, and I can't think of the place now, but he eventually ended up in Tomoka Farms area in Volusia County, and this is where they came into Titusville. And he, along the way, as I mentioned, he worked cruiser men gathering turpentine, and the master's son turned out to be very successful, and my grandfather was not successful, and they met later on, and he offered to share the master's son offered to share his monies with my grandfather, who refused it. He said he had as much opportunity to be successful in his involvement as did the master's son.
What was their last name? The master's son. What was his name?
Fayson.
Oh, so you took the master's son?
No, we
Fayson.
didn't.
Oh, no,
We changed it.
you changed?
They were Faison, and we changed it from FAI to FAYSON, and so we're able to identify who's who. But the Faysons, wherever they are, we're all related. FAISONs and FAYSON, all related. And
The reason I asked you about the turpentining is because many years ago when I interviewed Buddy Wilson, they were involved in turpentining.
they were all, that was a part of the crew.
Oh, that was part of the
That was
crew.
part of the crew.
Small world.
It is small world, and the Faysons and Wilsons were very close over the years, and that closeness continued through and Harriette and what's the Wilson, Edna Wilson.
Yeah.
They were very, very close. As a matter of fact, it ended up where J.W. Smith and what was his wife? Oh, you I got your stuff now. Well, as a matter of fact, that was a wedding between the Faysons and the. He was a Smith. As a matter of fact, Jonah Smith, who was a part of the crew, working crew, stole their oldest daughter at the age of 13 and wedded her. And from that wedding, there were 13 kids.
Yeah.
13 kids. They all since have deceased, but there were 13 from that connection. As I pointed out, one of the sons from Hattie's 13 married into the Wilson family. And what was
I can't think.
can't think of her name now, but they all interred out at the Oak Ridge Cemetery.
The bells will tell you. The bells will tell them.
The bell. Oh yes, yeah. The bells will know very well.
Okay. One more thing. When were you involved, or the Fayson family involved with the turpentining? Do you remember them talking anything about Kelly's Turpentine Still, which was on US 1 in Mims?
Yeah. They somewhere out in West Florida, Panama City area. And Steenahatchee, that's the place I was trying to think of. Steenahatchee. They when they came out of Georgia, went down into Steenahatchee, and also the Panama City area, out in that area there, and the Mitchell family up in Mims,
Yes.
and the Fayson family. They were turpentiners.
They lived out off of 46.
Off
the
of 46,
turpentine
right.
Yes.
And of course, like I pointed out earlier, my grandfather, he didn't work for other folk. He worked for himself. He contracted. He would gather groups of men and would do the work. And the Mitchell family and my family knew each other coming into the area. As I pointed out, the Tomoka Farm area, and I don't know just which portion of that area that the Mitchells came in, but they were all into the turpentine.
Yeah, that was big turpentine area up in
yeah.
there. Yeah, funny.
Turpentine, and then when the turpentine ran slack, they started cutting tires to extend the railroad, the Florida East Coast Railroad.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, is there anything else that you think you would like to tell me today?
Other than my family and the AME Church produced quite a few ministers.
And what are all their names? Tell me their names.
H.W. He completed the largest AME church in the state of Florida down in Miami. So he was the oldest of the brothers. And then next in the line would be Reverend Milton Fayson, and Then following Milton would be Ira, who was an evangelist.
Yes,
And
yes.
then they called the last one Matthew,
call
the
him
singing preacher.
Yeah, it's called.
And the woodsman. He was a fisherman, hunter, and that. But there were 4 of them who went into the ministry, and they called them the 4 horsemen of the AME Church in the state of Florida. And
Grandsons.
then my brother, I had
Grandsons.
the grandsons. 2 of my brothers, one is deceased, and one is living here in Titusville. They were AME ministers, and the one brother who's passed, Frank, 3 of his youngsters were AME ministers. So it turns out that there was preachers and teachers in my family. We were fortunate enough to attend Florida A&M, well, Edward Waters College, our church school. My brother and I, my brother who since deceased, James, we attended there where we played football for Coach Campbell, and we were able to get scholarships after our military. And we attended the church school for 2 years, and then Florida A&M University, where we got the undergraduate degree. And then we were fortunate enough, well, I earned my master's degree from Stetson University and Florida Institute of Technology down in Melbourne. And James also earned his master's degree from Florida Atlantic University, where I have my doctorate from. So we kind of stuck together along the line. And my oldest sister, Olivia, she's an early childhood educator, and she has since moved back to Titusville at the age of 94. So we were preachers and teachers in my family.
And that's a wonderful legacy to have.
Preachers and
teachers. And I remember dear Ella. I spent several afternoons talking with Ella, and I have her recorded on just a tape recorder because I didn't do video back then. But I remember that she related to me that she was in #1 choir at St. James Missionary Baptist Church,
Right.
and we got to singing one afternoon, and then she said, "Oh my, I can hardly sing anymore." I said, "Well, it's all right, Ella, nobody's listening but the Lord." But she was a delight and very proud of her heritage.
Yeah, she was the youngest.
She was the youngest.
The youngest, and the spoiled one.
And attended her 100th birthday party.
Yes.
Amen to
You were
that.
there?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
well,
I was
good.
there,
Yeah,
yes.
we were there.
Yes,
Yeah, we were there. And I'm sure you were there too.
Yes, she was. I think everybody in town was there.
Yeah, the West and Fayson family were very close over the years. And that was my second home, of course, with my godmother. And then I had the opportunity of teaching her son, and who was very close to me, and I was a big brother for him.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's wonderful.
And life's been good. What can I
Life
say?
has been wonderful
Been
and
beautiful.
many blessings
Yeah.
to everyone. And I'm hoping that this will continue in the neighborhood so we can leave the legacy of
Right.
everyone there and let the children know how important all of this is. And I want to thank you so much for coming.
And I had 2 sisters, and one of my sisters was a teacher. Her name was Janie Johnson.
Janie Johnson.
Yes. And I had a son that was what was it? What he groomed dogs.
Yes, and he was out in California. He was a noted groomer
Right.
who was just in preparation to move back here and open business.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, I chaired the Brevard County Housing Authority. And I was in a conference out there and had opportunity to meet with him out in San Francisco. And he took me around, and I forget the the narrow street that is elevated.
Yeah.
And he took me there and before we knew it, and scared my wife to death. But fine young man, young man.
And I
he
have
since
a
passed
yes,
on.
and I have a grandson that he's working with the Brevard and the Brevard system.
Parks and Recreation.
Parks and Recreation.
And what is his name?
Mark Jackson
Mark Jackson.
Jr. Yes, and then there was an older man that lived on Palm Avenue. He was a blacksmith to Denmark.
Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Denmark.
Yes, he had a blacksmith shop. Right.
Okay, I don't. That was before my time.
No, that was before your time.
Yeah.
But Miss Denmark, you know Miss Denmark.
Oh yes, Miss Denmark.
Yeah, her husband
was on the railroad
Right,
on
right.
First Avenue.
Yeah.
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 You know, everything, old homes that were built were not facing the street, the street, but the railroad, because that was the main traffic was
Right.
the train.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Denmark home
Right.
faced the railroad. Mrs. Bessie Smith home faced the railroad.
Railroad, yeah.
Miss Addie Taylor's home faced the railroad. All of those places faced the railroad back then.
Isn't that so?
Because that was where people traveled.
Yeah,
Right,
that's right.
yeah.
And you had a lot of folk, a lot of hobos that would come through. I
Yeah.
was old enough to witness them. A lot of travel back then.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, and for coming today. I appreciate it, and your contribution to the oral history program.
Well, thank you for presenting, and
Right. Yes.
we appreciate the service that you've given over the period of time
Yes. Yes.
to the community.
It's my pleasure.
Right,
Very much so.
right,
Thank
right.
I want to thank you
God's
for your
blessing.
service.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Did we, just one quick question, I know I'm not
All
supposed
right.
to be asking questions,
Okay.
Okay.
but you rescued him from a burning building?
My house.
Yes.
Yeah. Our house caught on fire, and I had him on the front porch.
Wow.
Right.
He was just a baby.
He was just.
Yeah.
He was my little baby.
And
I'm sorry, I
That's
just
okay.
have to know a little more about that.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah, she is 100 and
I'm 100.
100.
100.
Yes. I
And,
celebrated my 100. They celebrated my 100th birthday last year for 3 days and 3
That's
nights.
right. And your birthday is when?
June the 22nd.
June 22nd, 1918.
Yes.
And she'll be 101.
Right.
And,
Yes.
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 And I'm 86, so
Yeah.
God
She,
bless. That's wonderful.
she saved.
Fantastic.
She
Yeah.
allowed
Yeah,
me.
you're fantastic.
Right.
She allowed me to reach
God has
that.
graced you.
Yeah.
God is good.
Yeah.
God
All
is
the
good.
time.
Many blessings.
Yes. Yes.
I understand that you worked for the Pritchards.
Yes, I worked for the Pritchards, and my mother was the cook, and his aunt Hattie Smith was the maid, and they had a. I was working here, and I would come up every morning before I go to school and sweep from the corner on Hopkins back to Washington, and she gave me a quarter and an apple every day. That's what I did.
And how old were you when you did that?
I was about 12,
About
10 or 12. Yeah, yeah. And Hattie Smith was the maid, and my dad was the yardsman. He did the yard,
Oh.
and they had palmetto trees out here on the front, and he would trim those trees, get up there and trim those trees, and to keep them beautiful. And we had an old man. He was a blacksmith, but Denmark lived on Palm, and then the courthouse, was over there, and then we had black people living on Palm.
Over here.
Right, and they bought all that out, and the White family, the Lizzie White and Tom White, they were living on Palm Avenue.
Mm.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, before they built the courthouse.
Yes,
and
right,
and yeah,
right.
The government center, that
Right,
was all, yeah,
yes,
that was black
right,
families who lived in
Yes,
those areas, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and your mother worked here too?
Yes, she was the cook.
She was the cook?
Yes.
And what time period was this, in the 30s? 20s?
20s.
1920s.
Yeah, because the daughter and my sister were born the same year, and Mama was.
Oh, Mary Schuster.
Right, Mama was working here then.
Oh.
Yeah, and I remember Grandma Pritchard, and Mr. Bootnock Pritchard, and Mrs. Lovett Pritchard.
Mrs. Lovett Pritchard.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I would come over here, and I had to do the furniture, polish the furniture.
Polish the furniture.
Yeah.
Goodness.
So, and that's about it.
Well, we'll give them time to let the others
Well,
come.
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. That's amazing. I forgot about that.
Right.
Yes.
My purse over there.
Okay.
Yeah. Get my purse down.
That's your first.
I'll get your purse. I
I want to leave that money.
No.
Yeah.